So with Season 2 in full swing, today I thought I would go through the best graphic settings for Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 and Warzone for consoles. That's PlayStation 4, Xbox One, Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5. Having the best settings in the game will allow you to do even better at the game, win more matches, get more kills and do better overall. Now if you find this useful, be sure to leave a like and feel free to check out my other Season 2 guides like how to level up the Battle Pass fast, leveling up weapons fast, that kind of thing. Without further ado, let's get straight into it. Alright, so we're starting off with the graphic settings, and if you go to details and textures as the first thing, we've got on-demand texture streaming. Now this basically what it does is it allows you to, on top of the base textures which are downloaded with your game, you can download extra textures to basically make everything in the environment look better using the internet. Now this is good because obviously it gives you a better quality image in the overall environment. Textures look more decent, however it does obviously use some bandwidth to do this. It can cause bugs and so on. So if you notice any problems with it, or if you've got any problems with the connection at all, I would definitely recommend turning this off. If you haven't, it's not so much of an issue. It's completely up to you, but probably best if internet's issue at all to have it turning off, just to reduce the latency and improve the speed of the connection in your game. Next, we've got the world and weapon motion blur. Now these basically give a blur effect, as you can see in the right hand image, and you can set that both for the actual environment itself when you're spinning or for the actual weapon. To be honest with you, these are quite off-putting. They're not particularly nice to look at, and they obviously make the game more difficult, so I'd highly recommend turning these off. You don't need these at all. Keep them off and you'll be good to go. Next, for the film grain, this adds, as you can see, a visual noise, and therefore you want to keep this to minimum, so turn this off. And for the depth of field, when you have this on, it basically causes blurring around where you're aiming down sight with the weapon. So again, you want to keep this off. As for the Fidelity FX CAS, this, as it says, enhances the sharpness. You can turn this on, it looks good, but if there's any problems, obviously try it out and turn it off if you need. And obviously you can turn that up, doesn't matter too much. I'd recommend putting it at least sort of 50 to 100%, maybe 75 is good about there. Next, for the field of view, this is quite important. So the larger the field of view, the more you can actually see around your environment. And this is important because if you're quite zoomed in with a small field of view, like say 60, then that means you can only see a small portion of what's going on in the environment. So if someone's like standing to your left like an enemy and they're going to shoot you, you might not see them if they're slightly out of the field of view. So if they were in the 80 or 100 pane, you literally wouldn't see them because they're out of that white box. So you want to make your field of view as large as possible. However, if you have it too big, the enemies appear smaller because it's more zoomed out, and so does the weapon and so on. And while this isn't a problem necessarily in itself, you know, because you can counteract that with things like improving your recoil or using a higher powered scope, I think you don't want too high a field of view, otherwise it's sometimes more difficult to spot enemies. So I would say probably stick it at least 100, if not more. Then for the field of view, you want to turn this to affected, and this basically means that when you aim down sight, it sticks to your field of view setting, whereas if you put it on independent, it goes back to the usual field of view, the smaller one, which is not helpful. So keep this so that it affects when you're aimed down sight. And then for the weapon field of view, you want to keep this to wide, so you basically can see more of the environment, but obviously your weapon will look smaller in the process. I just want to point out as well, at this point there will also be 120 Hz refresh rate if that's available. Basically you have to have one of the next gen consoles, so either PS5 or an Xbox Series X, and you also need to have a monitor with 120 Hz refresh rate. Even though I've got a PlayStation 5, I don't currently have a TV hooked up to it with 120 Hz refresh rate or a monitor, so therefore this isn't an option. But if it is, it will pop up here between these two and you can turn it on. You get a higher refresh rate, you can see changes in the environment more quickly. Very, very useful. If that's on, turn it on. Otherwise, if not, don't worry about it too much. Next, for third person field of view, I feel like most people this won't apply to, but if you do play the third person modes, or you do toggle to third person for things, then you want to put this as high as possible, or pretty much as high as possible. So sort of maybe 85, 90, something like that. Then for the first person camera movement, you want to put this to least. It basically means you have less camera shaking and you get a clearer picture overall, which obviously helps you to survive better in the game. As for third person camera movement, again you want to put this to least, although I doubt this will apply to many people. And for third person, you want to keep this as third person, otherwise it will switch between third and first, which doesn't look particularly pleasant when you're playing. Next, we've got the default spectator camera. Just leave that as is, that's fine. And then for the brightness, it's up to you. I put it about 60, but you could probably go either side, but 60 is what works well. It just depends on what you like. I wouldn't necessarily stick 100% to the three boxes you can see. Like for example, the one I've got set up now, I wouldn't say it's barely visible. It's kind of quite visible, but not as much as easily visible. But I don't think that matters too much. But if it is obviously too bright, you can turn it down to maybe like 55, something like that. But yeah, 60s, I think pretty good. So we've then got the safe area. Now, a lot of people will want to put this quite wide. And the reason for this is because you're thinking, thinking, you know, you can see a wider area on the TV. But this is just for the HUD. It's not for the actual game itself. It's just for the actual icons and like minimap and stuff that pops up on screen. So what you want to do, you want to make this ideally as small as possible, but with the caveat that if you've got a smaller TV and you've put it quite narrow, then you might actually have quite a small amount of area that's not taken up with HUD, so not like minimap and weapon and ammo and all that. Once you take that all away, there'll be a very small space. So if you find it's too cramped and too narrowed, do push it out a bit, but I'd recommend trying to keep it fairly narrow, because basically the reason for that is that the wider you put it, the nearer to the edge it is, the less likely you are to see it properly, because sometimes the edge of the TV is difficult to see, but also you'll normally be looking somewhere in the center of the screen, and when you make the safe area wider, what you're actually doing is you're meaning that the distance and therefore the time it takes to move your eyes to look at the outer areas like the mini map, which is, you know, if you set the safe area quite wide, it's going to be further away, like towards the edge of the TV. This actually is a further distance for your eye movement to travel, and also it takes longer to do so because your eyes are having to move further, and also you're not able to focus or concentrate as quickly when moving between different parts of the screen, even though you might not realize you're actually doing it. So therefore you want to keep it fairly narrow so that you're reducing the distance between important parts of the HUD like the mini map and so on, and the center area of the screen where you're looking to see where players are. And it just means you're more likely to survive. It just gives you a bit of an advantage. Not everyone knows that, but I think it's important to bear in mind. So that's it for the first part of the graphics, but we're not done there. Don't worry about it, because next we've got the interface settings. So for this, a lot of these you can kind of leave as is, but we'll go through them quickly. So for the menu text size, up to you. If you have visual impairment or, you know, you're further away from the TV or something, you can change it. For me, default is fine. The text chat size doesn't really bother me. Language, set that obviously is whatever you want. For the color customization, this is really important. So I would personally put this on filter 2. This basically adds like more saturation to the environment, because in a lot of Call of Duty games, especially with like the new Ashka Island map, it's very gloomy, dark color palette. It's really boring, it's off-putting, and I don't particularly find it that present. With filter 2, it really kind of pops out. You get a lot more color, and I often have people ask me on my videos like, oh, how does your game look so good? In reality, it's because I turn the saturation up, or I did in the past with other games. I turn the saturation up when I'm recording the gameplay, but now in this game we've got options to actually mess with the color directly in the game. So yeah, put that on filter 2 and you should be good. Now for the color filter target, you can choose whether you want the whole world or just some of the interface and so on to be affected, but I would say both, because obviously, you know, more color for both just makes everything pop a bit more, everything looks nicer. Why not, you know? And then for the world color intensity, up to you. I would say put this somewhere between 80 and 100. It's up to you, but I think 100 is good. If it's too bright and too saturated, obviously you can turn it down, but somewhere between 80 and 100, probably 100 is good. And same for the interface color intensity, unless you have a problem with it. With the HUD color palette, I've just kept this on default, but feel free to change to whatever. I think sometimes also the certain colorblind features help. So if you're colorblind, obviously this will help you to kind of find something that works best for you, but I'm going to leave it with default. And you can also mess about with the different icon colors depending on like your arrow and your pointer, also the teammates, parties, enemies, that all that kind of stuff. So feel free to change those. I've just left it as default, but you can change it to whatever you want. And then going back, we've got subtitles. Now some people like to have these on. I like to have it on for things like campaign and so on, but for other modes, I'll be honest, it's a little bit distracting, so I keep it off. But it would be reasonable to put this on, because if you do put it on, then sometimes if enemies are near you and their characters say quiet things, they'll speak, but you won't really hear it because you're not that close, or maybe you don't have the volume fully up or something. And this subtitles are good because it actually picks up things you might not normally see. I've noticed this before, but to be honest with you, in multiplayer and Warzone, I find the subtitles quite distracting, so I leave it off. But definitely, if that doesn't bother you, put it on, because they're good for spotting subtle things, finding enemies more easily, and you're more likely to survive, in all honesty. And obviously you can then mess about with the size depending on what suits you and how good your visual acuity is, and mess about with the opacity as well. Next, for the HUD, this is incredibly important, so listen up. I'm sure most of you will have done this, but if not, you want to make sure you've changed from round to square. Even though you think round might look slightly nicer, you get a larger proportion of the minimap you're able to see. So you're able to see more in your minimap, more of the enemies of the environment. It's really important. You're going to have the advantage compared to those who have it on round. So I think sometimes by default it's put to round. You definitely want to make sure you keep it on square. After this, we've got the minimap rotation. Now you can either have this off, in which case the map rotation will be static and the player will move, you will move relative to the map, or if you have it on, the map will always keep keep you center focus, like facing forward, and the map will rotate depending on which direction you're in. I find on is better because it's going to be confusing if it's like your character's pointing backwards, like down or something on the map, and you can't tell which way is. It's a bit more confusing and it's harder for your brain to interpret really quickly, which you need to do in gunfights. I'd say keep this on. It's much easier and I would say better overall. Next, we've got the horizontal compass. Again, feel free to keep this on. It's up to you. Doesn't really matter. And for the crosshairs, keep these on too. Hit markers are useful, I'd say, just for knowing if you've actually hit enemies and how much damage they've taken and so on. It helps with that. Same with the damage-based hit markers to indicate how much damage you've done to them. And player names, I say it's good to have it on full so you can just see where they are. They pop out a little bit easier with the name, so it's useful for that sense. Everything else pretty much is as it is. The only other thing I would say is sometimes people like to put the center dot on, and the reason for this is that, so if like your vision in game has been affected, having this center dot will allow you to know where the center is. It helps you to aim better at times. So for example, if someone threw a stun grenade at you, or I don't know, something else is going on to obstruct a screen, this is really useful for knowing where the center is. Obviously, as it says here, it also helps with motion sickness, but I think the main thing is it gives you an advantage to know where your center is. It helps with aiming, but it's not for everyone. So I've kept it off, but I can understand why people would want to put it on. And then you can choose like the intensity and so on as well of it. So that is it for the graphics settings. If you do all those things, you're going to have a really good set of graphics. Everything's going to be optimized. You're going to be playing as best you can in game, and you're going to do better in game, get more kills and get more wins overall. So hope you found this useful. If you did, be sure to leave a like so that other people can find the video too. Check out my other Season 2 guides. Feel free to subscribe so you don't miss out on any upcoming Modern Warfare 2 or Warzone videos, and go out there and get some wins. Hope you found this useful, and I'll see you guys all on the next one.